Waiting for the broadcast. Yes. Okay, let's get started. Hello, my name's Julia Reiber. I'm the Deputy Project Director for this Roadless Area Conservation Analysis and Rulemaking, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's meeting. This is a 1-hour meeting about the Roadless Area Conservation Final Environmental Impact Statement and Preferred Alternative. There is a 1-page sheet that's available up front as well as on the tables when you come in. We call that the frontliner. There are also some summaries available. The way this meeting is going to work is we're going to start with our Forest Service Chief Mike Dombeck is going to start with some opening remarks and discussing this analysis and the preferred alternative. That'll be followed by some question and answers. For those of you here in the Jefferson Auditorium, you've probably noticed there's a lot of lights and cameras around. We also have the opportunity, this is being broadcast live via satellite to those units in the field that have the capacity to pick this up. Because of that, we're going to have some procedures we need to follow when we have the questions and answers. We'll be able to take questions both from you all here in the auditorium as well as all the people in the field. Some of the people I understand in the field will be able to listen in but not be able to see, so some things I will be describing, for example, the phone number to call in. Others of you in the field, you should be able to see it on your screen. What we'll do is when it comes time for questions and answers, I'll ask you to stand, for those of you here in the auditorium, I'll ask you to stand up in line, queue up behind the microphones, and when I signal that it's your turn, then state your name and ask your question. All questions will have to be spoken into the microphone so that everybody can hear them, as those people out in the field as well as everybody in here. For those of you in the field, what you'll do is you'll call in. The number to call is 800-384-7623. Again, that's 800-384-7623. What you'll do is you'll call, somebody will be on the line, and they'll ask you to state your name and what forest you're from, and then they'll put you on hold. I will receive a cue card with people's names, and what I will do is I will then broadcast your name. When you hear your name, that's your chance to ask your question. When you ask your question, you're going to be broadcast over the speakers in here so that everybody in the auditorium will be able to hear your question as well as those, the chief will be able to answer your question by hearing it. So again, I'll be getting the cue card. When I say your name, I'll say, go ahead, Vivian on the Monongahela, and then you go ahead and ask your question. What I'd like to do is take a mix of questions from folks here in the auditorium with it also in the field. So when it comes time for the question and answers, just go ahead here in the auditorium, line up behind the microphones, and I'll either signal to somebody at the microphone or I'll then call somebody off the cue card. We also have signers here today. They are Tony Porco and Jennifer Vinson. Are they here? Okay, great. And I want to let you know that we have a lot of information available, easily available. All the documents that we've produced are on the, thank you very much, are located on the website, as well as the Roadless team's just across the river, and we have numbers for you to call and ask questions as well as the website. The point I'm making is that there's a lot of different methods that you can get your questions answered, both in the field as well as for those of you in the auditorium. This today is our chance to be able to ask our chief his perspective on this important rulemaking. rulemaking effort. And so I just encourage all of you to take advantage of having Mike up here on stage to be able to ask your questions of him. We'll be happy to answer all the questions that you have out there. Just wanted to remind you this is your chance to have Mike. Okay, they want me to read the number out again. So, for you in the field, the call-in number is 1-800-832-7259. Again, that's 1-800-832-7259. Or the local number is 202-720-8436. And I see that number is different than I first had, so scratch out what I read earlier. And again, I'll do those one more time. 1-800-832-7259, or the local number is 202-720-8436. And without any more of these technical things, I'll turn it over to our Chief, Mike Dombeck.
Well, thanks, Julia. Appreciate it. I want to welcome everybody that's here in the Jefferson Auditorium and also welcome those of you that are out in the field. It's really a tremendous opportunity to be able to talk to an audience of this stature. When I think about, I look in the auditorium here and no, we don't have it filled up. Most of the people are out in the field, but what we do have is the regional foresters, the station directors, deputy chiefs, in town here. So for those of you out in the field, if you got any hard questions for your bosses, I'll relay them onto them. I welcome them and know that our primary topic here is roadless, but anything is fair game. You know, I've got 2 or 3 challenges with this job, and one of them is communications and time management. I get in as much trouble for what I don't do as what I do, and I know a lot of you have that same situation. I understand that Dale Bosworth practically has stock in the airlines now, that if you could only use those frequent flyer miles, Dale. But somebody's watching. At any rate, this is just an absolutely monumentous day for the Forest Service. If you think about all that's going on, and I want to talk about Roadless, and I also want to say that the technical people that put all this together are here, and first and foremost, I want to thank Hilda Diaz-Saltero, our Associate Chief for Natural Resources, Jim Furnish, Deputy Chief for National Forest Systems, Scott Conroy, who's out there still smiling. Many of you know Scott from another life in California and other places. Scott was project team leader. You just saw Julia a little while ago. I think it is Scott that Julia is really the one that does the work on this team. Chris Wood has been tirelessly there with us. I mentioned Jim Furnish and many other people. And I know the people from the content analysis team in Salt Lake City. Jack, I saw those stacks and stacks and stacks of well over a million comments that they dealt with. And I want to say thank you to all of you that have worked so hard on this challenging issue. And the challenges associated with Roadless aren't necessarily new. They've been around for a long, long time. We had 600 public meetings, people on the front lines in the field, sometimes contentious meetings, sometimes very supportive meetings, but that's all part of the way a democratic society operates, and we're that forum for that debate. It's our responsibility, and you know, the debate is okay. The debate is what a democracy functions on, and this year, as a fact, as I was calling members of Congress this morning, one of the things we were talking about was the election and the phenomenal year of history making that's going on in Florida and perhaps New Mexico and other places like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Let's take a look at the historical context. We're dealing with a lot of controversy. That's not new. We have been for a long, long, long time. As a matter of fact, the very genesis of the Forest Service and the establishment of the National Forest System, first called Forest Reserves, came out of controversy. 80 million acres of stump lands, the cutovers in the United States, the denuded watersheds in the Appalachians, in the Northeast, in my home state of Wisconsin, all across the country. The very genesis of the controversies associated with that era, from the time that President Theodore Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot set aside the midnight reserves. Can you imagine what it must have been like for a chief of the Forest Service to be walking over to the White House with rolls of maps under his arm just days before the president's authority to set out forest reserves expired? Sitting on the floor, laying on the floor, drawing the lines on the map with a wide crayon specifically to blur the boundaries, to the president to sign the documents, put them in a safe, and then sign a piece of legislation revoking the president's authority to do that, and then pull the maps out. Could you imagine if I did that, what the hearings would be like? This that we deal with really isn't new. In fact, the first roadless area evaluations took place in 1926, where the Forest Service inventoried areas larger than 230,400 acres in size, and I'm told we had about 72 million acres in that first go-around. And the more memorable times for us, at least, as roadless have been a rare one and a rare two, but these areas have been controversial for a long, long time. And as I think about the history making that occurred when the midnight reserves were set aside, that occurred in other times like that, I believe we're in one of those times right now. And let me say that it's the Forest Service employees that stood tall dealing with these issues, standing up for a land ethic, being conservation leaders, that really got us through these times. And that same ethic and that same leadership is in the Forest Service today, looming as large as it ever did. And I thank you for all of that worked on this issue. Before I get into the specifics of the preferred alternative, I want to stress some things that this proposal will not do. It will not block existing access to national forests and grasslands for hunting, for fishing, for off-road vehicle use, for other dispersed recreation activities, for wildlife habitat management, or any other permitted authorized use of the national forest. It doesn't close a single mile of road. What it precludes is road building. And as I was out last night, it's full moon, or at least close to it, I was thinking that it's about 240,000 miles to the moon, and we have the responsibility for 383,000 miles of roads. By my calculation, that's almost enough to get there and halfway back. That's a lot of roads that we have, and we probably have about enough. When you have an $8 billion backlog, what is it that you do? You need to do something different, and I'm proud of the leadership as we took on issues like roads, roadless, and with the planning reg rollout last week, with all that has been accomplished. And I'm going to assume, to save time so there's more time for questions, assume that everybody's familiar with the draft environmental impact statement. And I really want to talk about the differences between the final preferred and the draft. First, the preferred alternative prohibits new road construction and timber harvest, except for clearly defined stewardship timber harvest in inventoried roadless areas. Hundreds of thousands of people called for outright prohibition of timber harvest from inventoried roadless areas. And I got to tell you, based upon the advice from a lot of you, and as chief in this job, I can't say that never ever do we not do vegetative management in these roadless areas. Needless to say, my assumption is that entry into these roadless areas will be rare and for very specific, important purposes, and that it'll be open to the public planning process, just like most things that we do. Now, let me just talk a little bit more about stewardship harvest. And basically the objectives that are outlined there, and that's that stewardship harvest is designed to maintain and enhance roadless area values. To to restore habitat for threatened or endangered species, reduce the risk of uncharacteristically catastrophic or severe fire, and restore ecological structure, function, and processes. Second, the preferred alternative includes the Tongass National Forest after a 4-year transition period. And it's in this transition period that we will develop a strong assistance package to help those workers, those families, make the adjustments that need to be made. We can't justify protecting roadless areas where they exist in remnant form in the lower 48 while still allowing those activities to occur on the Tongass National Forest, our largest intact, unfragmented forest in the United States. The third has to do with part 2, and that's what do we do with these areas smaller than the 5,000 acre inventoried roadless areas. And those areas will basically be dealt with in the planning regulation. So in essence, that piece that was referred to as part 2 has been taken out of the roadless rule and dealt with in the planning regulations. And we think it's important that this change really focuses on the importance of planning, and that the collaborative approach, the science-based approach to the new planning regulations is the appropriate forum, and that's where the dialogue and the debate concerning the values of these areas needs to occur. Now, taken together, we've got new planning regulations. Today, the roadless preferred alternative is out in final EIS, and not long the roads policy will be out. Taken together, this is really a very, very coherent package of dealing with some of the biggest issues that have been on our plate for a long, long time. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for the people that are here in the Jefferson Auditorium, as well as those of you in the field and other places for all the work you've done to help pull this together. Because we're really recognizing the values and values on into the future. One continually needs to ask the question, who's going to want us in 20 years and 50 years, and why? Of what values will the National Forest be? And in fact, as we look at the values of the National Forest today, and then we look back 50 and 100 years, those values are very, very different. The values of municipal water supplies, and if there's going to be an issue in the United States in the next decade, in fact, it's upon us now, it's that issue of water. The increasing recreation workload that we have, the large unfragmented tracts of land, the need to provide additional measures to protect the roadless areas. They're our bulwark against the invasions of exotic species, the most resistant areas to maintain the natural biodiversity that's there. They're the anchor points for species at risk, for endangered species. The cleanest water is coming off of these areas. The values of these areas go well beyond that and are absolutely tremendous. And what we see wrapped up in planning and roads and roadless is a very coherent approach to dealing with many, many of these issues. Let me just tell you a little bit from a philosophy standpoint why the leadership of the Forest Service, and we decided to deal with some of these issues in some way. We were literally drowning in controversy associated with roads, and roadless are really wrapped up. And if one asks the question, why is it that our roads budget was going down, 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 and down every year to the point of virtual extinction if we had maintained that rate of decline? And since we took on the roads issue and dealt with a moratorium, the temporary suspension of road building, the last 3 years, our roads budget is now going back up again, and I think what we've done is we've separated the roads issue from the roadless issue, because that controversy really revolved around building roads in roadless areas. And yet we've got this tremendous infrastructure to maintain that people need to drive to go hiking, biking, hunting, fishing, do the forest management job, and all the things that we do on the National Forest. And we need to separate those two issues. Now, the confluence of these issues and the 2000 fire season is really tremendous. because with all the teachable moments, all of the stress, all of the work that this agency was taking on, and then to have this tremendous fire season laid on top of what you did, and I've got to commend everybody, especially our firefighters, for doing it safely, doing it efficiently, and I got a standing ovation in Hamilton, Montana, and I don't know how often you get standing ovations in Hamilton, Dale, but our folks really appreciate what our Forest Service employees do. So, but the opportunity we have is really to take our organizational energy and move them away from these controversial areas of old growth, of roadless, and focus on the urban-wildland interface of the communities at risk. And Congress and the administration have stepped up to the plate, and we got our biggest budget increase in history, $900 million to deal with fire. And I got to thank people like Lyle Laverty, Bob Jacobs, Michael Raines, many others, Jim Lyons, our Undersecretary and the Deputy Secretary of Interior worked hard at putting the report together for the President that ultimately ended up with us getting these unprecedented budget increases. So we've got an opportunity now to make that shift, to invest the dollars in the land at the urban-wildland interface, to deal with the communities at risk, to provide the community assistance, do the monitoring, and do the forest management job that's so important that we do, that people depend upon us to do. And I've got to say that with all of this that's going on, my view is I don't think our priorities have been this clear for a long, long time. For many years, competing interests placed us squarely in the middle of opposing points of view in a very charged, value-laden social debate. And for those that thrive on controversy, you might say, well, the Forest Service was exactly where it should have been, with sort of everybody unhappy with us. Well, I got to tell you, that's not why I came to work for the Forest Service, and probably not why many of you came to work for the Forest Service. We came to work for this agency because we were interested in the land, we were interested in conservation, we were interested in basically caring for the land and serving people. And I think that these actions over the course of the last several years move us squarely ahead in the 21st century to make progress on a lot of these issues. It's important that we stand up for the conservation issues, that we apply the best science, the resource professional knowledge, that the hundreds of thousands of years of professional knowledge that are in this agency to move it forward. And I got to say that the debate over these issues will continue. It's not over. The important thing is that we apply the science, get as much of the money to the land as possible, make sure we focus on measurable performance of acres treated. And we have opportunities to provide local jobs like no time in history, because as we wrap all this together and deal with the $8 billion roads backlog, deal with our biggest budget increase in history that went from $3 billion to $4.4 billion. Not only is that jobs for Forest Service employees and future Forest Service employees as we replenish the workforce, this is also a local jobs program that's virtually unprecedented in any of our lifetime, and it's an opportunity that we've just got to step to the plate on. I was talking to Jack Ward Thomas on the phone yesterday afternoon, and we were sort of reminiscing about some of his challenges about the Northwest Forest Plan, the research that he'd worked on through the course of the career. And he said to me, he said, you tell the leadership of the Forest Service that this is our opportunity, this is our chance. The money is now on the table to move forward. But insanity, as Albert Einstein puts it, is doing things the way we've always done them and expecting different results. Well, this is an opportunity to do things differently, to deliver on the ground. And it's something that the chief cannot do alone. It's something that the regional foresters, the chief, the staff, or any individual forest supervisor can do alone. But I can tell you, the 30,000 employees of this organization can deliver this. We've got to be focused. We've got to know what the goal is. We've got to stay positive. Thank you for all that you do. Now let me ask Julia to come up and give us another rundown of the logistics for the rest of the hour that we have. And I'm happy to answer questions, hopefully about this topic, but anything that might be on your mind. And there are the experts like Jim Furnish, Scott Conroy, Chris Wood, and others in the audience that can answer the really hard ones.
Okay, good. Well, now's the time to ask questions. So if you could hear the folks here in the auditorium, go ahead and anybody who's interested in asking a question, come forward to one of the microphones. For you in the field, please call in at 1-800-832-7259 or the local number of 202-720-8436. And Chief Mike Dombeck will also be joined at this time by Chris Wood, Senior Policy Advisor to the Chief, and Scott Conroy, the Project Director. If you guys want to come on up here.
We've also got a room for Jim Furnish. He's going to get the really hard ones.
And Jim Furnish, our Deputy Chief. Okay, it looks like we've got a question from Region 4 Regional Office. Go ahead.
Yes, Chief Dombeck. Many of the inventoried roadless areas within Region 4 have roads and developments that weren't excluded from the inventories as an artifact of the age of some of those inventories. We're just wondering about why these areas are being included within the prohibitions of the roadless rule. And will there be some process for adjusting or changing inventory roadless boundaries to reflect this past development?
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the first half of that question. The audio here, we kind of missed it.
Okay, as an artifact of the inventory process, many of the inventoried roadless areas in Region 4 have roads and developments. We're wondering why these areas will be included within the prohibitions of the roadless rule. And then the second part was, will there be a process to make any adjustments?
Let me ask you if the roads are formally on our roads inventory. It sounds like they're not. Is that correct?
It would be on the roads inventory.
Okay. Let me ask Scott to answer that.
Yeah, our thinking on including those areas is they were in these areas when they were inventoried the first time. And they were inventoried because they met the minimum criteria for wilderness at the time, and so we didn't believe that situation had changed. We felt that they were still appropriate to be included if they were included in the original inventory.
What about roads and developments that have occurred after the inventory occurred but weren't ever taken out of that inventory?
We do have areas that have been roaded since, and if you remember in the proposed rule, we had language that would have excluded those. We had a lot of comments from both employees and the public, and we're really confused on how we were going to apply that rule and how we were going to draw the line between roaded and unroaded areas. We actually went through a fairly extensive process of coming up with language for a rule that would allow us to distinguish between roaded and unroaded areas in these inventoried roadless areas, and there was no good way to do it. There was no clean process that wouldn't have just led to more controversy. And as we looked at the difference in effects, it was only a minor difference. And to make sure the process was understandable to the public and to employees, that it was fair, and then it was easy to administer, we decided to include them all.
All right, thank you.
One of the things that I did as we initially took on this challenge is lay out some principles. Number one is simplicity, understandability, and administration of this. And that's really the underlying foundation behind Scott's answer to your question.
Okay, right now we have no calls waiting, and we have nobody in line at the microphone. Ah, here we go.
Hey, there's John Obst. I'll introduce him. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you.
John is let me introduce John for those of you that know him. We hail from the same state, except he gets to do a lot more grouse hunting than I do, living where I do now. But he's the not so new now elected National Union president.
Okay.
Works at the Forest Products Lab in Madison.
Well, thank you, Mike. I grouse hunt and grouse. So, obviously...
Grousing is welcome,
well, that's good, and I appreciate that.
as long as we keep it
opportunity.
civil.
The issue of jobs is of great concern to the union, and not just the jobs of our employees, but also the jobs in rural communities. And you made it sound like a zero-sum game. Jobs will be lost and jobs will be created perhaps as a minimum. Maybe even better, that there will be a net gain in jobs, so it'll be a positive gain. But the concern that I don't think has been addressed is that will you be creating jobs in the same places where you're losing them, both for the communities and for our employees? Will we lose 300 jobs in Alaska, but the 300 jobs that are created in Michigan and Ohio and Kentucky, for example?
I'd like to say that I thought I had that clout, or the Forest Service had that influence, or we had that influence, but the reality is we don't, because things continually change. And let me, and John and I visited for a while this morning, and did a month or so about some of these issues also, and that's that if you look at where we've been the last 10 or 15 years. And look at what's happened to the timber harvest, going from 12 billion to 3 billion, not as a result of any action, or some might say inaction of the Forest Service, but the fact is this is a judge's order. What my hope is, John, is that rather than reacting to a situation like we did in the Pacific Northwest, say about 10 years ago, that we're ahead of those controversies, and that we move away from that and focus the energy and the need to manage vegetation and the watershed restoration and all of the activities away from those controversial areas. I mean, there's a reason that the roadless areas are roadless. Either the timber values are low, in most cases, 9 million of this 49 in the lower 48 is in the timber base, and in most cases, not all, these are the least productive areas, and there's a variety of reasons. So we basically, as an agency, have a couple of choices. We can try to redirect our energy, or we can sort of keep the shoulder to the wheel and keep on trying to plow our way through this controversy that, in my view, is a losing game for us. And I think as a result of being able to, this year we're going to hire 1,500 employees. It's in Clyde's performance measures. You want to get exceeds? We, on October 1, and that goes for the regional foresters, the station directors, and all of these kinds of things, that we need to replenish the workforce that many of us will be retiring within the next 5 years. I'm in that category of the 42% that will be eligible to retire. And we need to make sure that we bring in the best, the brightest to take our places. Also, with regard to local jobs, if we wrap this all up and you take a look at the increases that we're getting now, $170 million in the 2001 appropriation for road maintenance. That's up almost $100 million from 3 years ago. That's all about jobs, not only for Forest Service employees, but for local contractors and others that are going to do this work of replacing and upgrading the bridges, decommissioning roads, maintaining roads, all of the things that we need to do. And my view is that we as an organization ought to be cheering for what happened this year with the largest budget increase in history. And 3 years ago, we were dealing with threats of custodial management. And the National Forest System is 250,000 acres bigger, and we've got our largest budget increase in history. And we've got some tough issues that have been dogging us for a long time resolved, like the Payments to Counties bill that was signed by the President last week, that decouples timber harvest from payments to schools and stabilizes it at a high level. There's lots going on, and a lot of opportunities. That doesn't mean that adjustments are needed as we adapt to the future, but the key to survival over the long haul is adaptability, flexibility, and looking ahead, and not being an organization. If several weeks ago I saw where Smith Corona stock had dropped to 6 cents a share. Most of you probably had a Smith Corona like I did, and we don't want to be a Smith Corona. Next question.
Okay, we have a question from the George Washington National Forest. Go ahead.
It's interesting to hear the Forest Service now taking credit for the largest budget increase in Forest Service history based on this disastrous fire season that we just had. This was truly one of the worst fire seasons ever, and both Congress and the public had real questions about how well the Forest Service is managing the forest and its ability to protect its neighbors. And in that vein, over the past few years, the Forest Service has reduced the number of employees in the agency over the past few years and our ability to fight fires. And many people feel we've also adopted land use policies that have been an obstacle to fighting fires. And I guess my question relates to this Roadless plan now before us. I'm just wondering if the agency had enough time, since being that the fire season occurred this year, and I'm just wondering if the agency had enough time to really consider the implications of this truly historic fire season and what effect having very large areas unroaded throughout the western United States and other parts of the United States is going to have on the ability to fight disastrous wildfires that can cover huge areas in terms of access needed, fire breaks, and things like that. Now, I recognize that part of what you said earlier indicated that we might be able to cut some trees to help out to relieve part of that problem. But I guess I'm just wondering if, since this is such an historic step involving so much acreage over such a large area, if you feel that you had enough time to examine this disastrous fire season and really look at the millions of acres of roadless and see if this plan that's being offered as the preferred or final is really how that's going to affect the fire situation in the future.
Well, thank you for that actually very, very thoughtful, power-packed question. There's probably at least 15 questions that I picked out of there, and let me start out by the Forest Service taking credit for the budget increase. Congress and the administration and the president that proposed this are the ones that deserve the credit because Congress appropriates the money. But if they didn't have confidence in us as an organization, they wouldn't give us the money. In fact, in addition to having our biggest budget increase in history, we also had the number of line items in the National Forest System reduced from 34 to 13, which further demonstrates the increasing confidence that Congress has in us to achieve accountability and the appropriate financial management systems. So I want to go back to that Darwinian statement that chance favors the prepared mind. In addition to that, in the introduction I mentioned the reports that were prepared by Michael Raines, Bob Jacobs, who's sitting right here in the third row, and Lyle Laverty, who's out at Western Governors. We were prepared in the development of the cohesive fire strategy, and you need to thank those gentlemen and the people that helped them develop this stuff to help us be ready when the stars line up. And we really don't know when the stars line up. Okay, and the next issue area you dealt with was the reducing workforce. The federal government is 340,000 employees smaller today than it was in the early 90s. The Forest Service is some 10,000 employees smaller. I don't know of anybody that wants bigger government. I don't know of anybody that has a big enough staff. And therein lies the dilemma that we face. And the reality of it is I don't look for a bigger government. and you've all heard the work smarter, all of the trite statements associated with that. But the fact is we do have to do business differently. And when we take a look at the recommendations from the reinvention hearings in 1993, the public said they wanted us to be the educators, the facilitators, the catalysts for bringing people together in local communities. That's the direction the planning regs take us. And in addition to all of that I've mentioned, the fact that we do have the commitment to hire 1,500 new employees. Clyde, does that include the fire folks as well? So there will be an additional 500 in fire, but those additional 500 will be distributed among all of the federal firefighting agencies. Is that right? He's nodding yes. So that's sort of the issue associated with personnel, and you can cut this. This is not partisan politics. It doesn't matter what the who's president, and I hope we know fairly soon as we wait for the vote count in Florida and what might come out of that. Your next series of comments had to do with our firefighting capability in unroaded areas. I got to tell you that we got the best firefighting force in the world. If every staff maintained a 98% track record like our firefighters do in putting out 98% of our fires in initial attack, we'd get A's in virtually everything that we do. We've got better capability than anybody else in the world to deal with wildland fires. If you look at the statistics, at least the statistics that I'm given with regard to how and where and when fires occur, only one out of every 4 fires is in a roadless area. The primary cause of fires that are human-caused are much higher in roaded areas, as you would expect. The acreage burned, there's no evidence showing it to be higher in wilderness or in unroaded or roadless areas. And then if we just take a look at our fire priorities as we dealt with this fire season, this is what they were. Firefighter and human safety first and foremost every time. No tree, no structure, no forest is worth the loss of a human life. Number 2, focus on communities at risk. These are not the roadless areas. The people with the expanding urban wildland interface, these are the areas that are already developed, that in many cases the initial timber harvest occurred years and years and years ago. And because of the incentive system and budget structure of the organization, we didn't have the money to go in there and do the work that needed to be done. In addition, with the culture of put every fire out every time, everywhere. So we've learned a lot about fire also in the last century that we're applying. And number 3 on the priority list for fire is get them while they're small, deal with initial attack. The priority place to spend money to deal with fire risk, forest health, is the urban wildland interface, is communities at risk. The healthiest forests are those that remain roadless or unroaded, for the most part. That's not to say that there aren't exceptions. There's exceptions to every rule, but essentially that's the situation as I see it with regard to the interaction of fire, numbers of employees, roadless areas. Did I miss anything? Okay, next question.
Okay, we've got a question from Region 8 Regional Office. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to know if whether a trailhead can be built within an inventoried roadless area.
I want to tell you your regional forester is listening. Let me ask Scott or Jim to address that. The question was, can a trailhead be built?
I guess the short answer is yes, as long as you don't need to build a trail through the inventory roadless area to get to the trailhead you want to build. There's nothing, as long as you don't want to build a road to get to the trailhead, excuse me. There's nothing in the rule that prohibits trail construction.
Good, thank you.
Are there any questions here in the auditorium? I have some waiting here as well, but I also want to give you a chance to ask any questions. Okay, we have a question from the Ochoco National Forest. Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Leslie Weldon calling from the Ochoco and Deschutes National Forest, and the question I had has to do with further guidance for determining management of unroaded areas that are smaller than the 5,000 acres that this rule covers. Are we looking at, once we get into planning again, moving into some kind of additional rare type analysis?
The answer to that last point is no. The smaller areas will be dealt with in the planning process. If you probably haven't had a chance to go through the planning regs, but you'll see that what was formerly Part 2 of the Roadless proposal has been moved over into the planning regs to deal with it at the local planning level. And we hope you're doing well out there, Leslie. We miss you. Al is here, and Hilda, and Chris.
Great, thank you.
Did I miss a question from the Ochoco?
That was it.
I thought she said she was on the... Oh, okay. Sorry, Leslie. Do we have any more questions from the field then? Okay, folks. Any questions here in the auditorium? That's pretty good timing, actually, because we're about time to wrap up here, I've just been notified. Anyway, so what I want to know is, I'm certain you all, both in the field and here in the Washington office, have a number of questions that weren't answered today, and as you go into the information that's provided, you'll have plenty more questions. You should know that today, or actually on Thursday, thousands of copies of the full FEIS were sent to all the field offices, as well as to public libraries, congressional offices, to all the respondents who gave substantive comments. So there is a mass mailing of these FEISs that are out in the mail and being received today. Another place where you can get any of this information, as well as all of the analysis documents and the preferred alternative, is on our website. It is at roadless.fs.fed.us. Again, that's roadless.fs.fed.us, and all of our analysis documents are on there, including the entire FEIS, a summary, full color maps, all the volumes. We have volumes that summarize all the responses to comments. We have a volume 4 that has all the letters that we received from elected officials. All those are available on the web. In addition, what's this? In addition, for the employees, you can call 1-800-384-7623, or here in the DC area, 703-605-5299. And those numbers for you here in the office, in the auditorium, those are located on this one-page summary. They're also everywhere. They're on the web. They're in the summary. Those numbers are available everywhere. So if you have more questions, we have a lot of opportunities available for you to ask the questions and find the information on the web. I really do recommend, before you even make a phone call, check the web. We've really tried to design it so that it'll answer your questions. With that, I'd like to let Mike wrap it up here. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Julia. Thank you for those that were bold enough to answer questions. Next year, we're going to be doing a lot more of this as we experiment and work with the new technologies, the video conferencing capabilities that we have, as we try to stay in touch and get better information out to you, more timely information on not only these kinds of issues, but all the issues. I want to make sure everyone's aware, for those of you that may not be NEPA experts, that the record of decision will be signed by the secretary, who has that authority, not sooner than 30 days from today. And that decision space that the secretary has is really the range of alternatives that we have analyzed. We have put the preferred alternative on the table. The Secretary may mix and match a little bit. That comes with the turf of a cabinet member and an administration, but we've laid our proposal on the table, and that may be somewhat different. I want to just close again by saying thank you for all that you do, and I know a lot of you deal with these tough controversies all the time, but I ask you to shift your thoughts to the positive and think about this tremendous legacy we have of 192 million acres of national forest, the intact private forest land that's contributing to jobs, to the quality of life in the United States. And as you struggle with the issues of the day, think about the product line that we in the Forest Service have. It's open space, it's clean water, it's large unfragmented tracts of land, it's forest and forest products, it's recreation opportunities, it's families strengthening their bonds, hiking, biking, camping, hunting, fishing on the national forest. It's clean air, it's aquifer recharge, it's the last remaining habitats for threatened and endangered species in the United States or in North America. This is a wonderful product line that we have. If we were a private company, the opportunities are just absolutely tremendous. So as you deal with the tough issues of the day, just as we deal with the hearings and the various controversies that we deal with here in Washington, that I know station directors, regional foresters, district rangers, and everybody in between deals with, it's important you think about this, because money flows to things that people want. And we have a product line that's second to none. Have a great fall. Thank you.